So now, ladies and gentlemen, live and in colour, it's Mr. Wayne Lovejuice.
The other day I produced a Louis, had a chat with an interesting chappie who said that the YouTube algorithms really aren't that happy. If a channel only broadcasts once a week, so we decided we could text ya whenever we've got a piece of news in our new book on the track extra. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we've got two old friends come to visit us in the studio today. It's Cara and it's Ralph the Monster. What are you here to do today, Cara and Ralph the Monster?
So Ralph, what's coming up? Book review.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as regular viewers of this show will know, whenever Richard Freeman comes to visit me up here at the CFZ, there's something we always end up doing. The CFZ and me as a person, as an individual, have an enormous collection of books. And it always turns up that Richard ends up going up into the library, collecting a book almost at random, and then we discuss it. He reviews it and then we discuss it. And this episode is no different from that. It is no different because in this episode, Richard is going to go down under. So what have we got today, Rich?
We've got the Yowie in Search of Australia's Bigfoot, written by, for my money, the two best field cryptozoologists in the world today, Tony Healey and Paul Cropper. They're the guys that wrote Out of the Shadows, The Mystery Animals of Australia, which is one of my favourite books of all time, and this is another one of my favourite books. It's absolutely great, and it's the most detailed exploration of the Yowie phenomena to date. Well, I say to date, they've just released another book called the Yowie File, which I just ordered today off Amazon, and I'm waiting for it to come. But until I read that one, the Yowie is the best book on the subject, and it looks at it from the time of the Aborigines and Aboriginal legends, things like the Duragal and things like that, the hairy giants of the Dreamtime, and then through the colonial era, when the creature was called the Yahoo, which is a name taken from Gulliver's Travels, the wild man in Gulliver's Travels. When you read Gulliver's Travels at school, you only read the stories where he goes to the two countries where there are tiny little people and the countries where there are giants, but there's other parts to Swift's novel as well. There's one where he goes to a country where there are intelligent horses that can speak, and horses are the dominant species, and the Yahoos are hairy wild men, and that's why the Yahoo was adopted originally as the white man's name for the Yowie. But Yowie came back into prominence in the 70s, but it goes all through the colonial period up to the 1970s, then the 1970s to the present day. And it's incredibly detailed. It's filled with eyewitness sketches, detailed interviews, tracks, measurements, and Tony and Paul really do the legwork. They go and interview all these people, they track down not just newspaper reports, they go and find the people and talk to them themselves. Then at the back of the book they've got a list of all of the cases from the year dot right up to 2006. 282 cases up to 2006, and dating as far back as, let me see, as far back as 1789 at Botany Bay. So I'm hoping the Yowie file is going to be a sort of update on this with the things that have happened since 2006. But not only is it a great resource, but it's brilliantly written as well. You could have the most interesting subject going, and if you were not a good and engaging writer, you couldn't make a good book. But these have got a fascinating subject, Tony and Paul, and they're great writers, and they really do their work, their homework, and the detail in it is great. And I've quoted this book numerous times, and I use it as part of my research again and again and again. And it's one of the best cryptozoological books ever written, the best book on the Yowie, easily. And I would unhesitatingly give it 10 out of 10 every time.
There is always the query when dealing with the Yowie as to what it actually is. What do Tony and Paul say?
They don't make any firm conclusions. They look at all the various theories. They look at the idea that it's a relic hominin, and in the last ice age, when the ocean levels were lower, there wasn't so much ocean between Australia and Asia, so it would be easier for primates to cross over. And we know that there's a known animal distribution method called rafting. That's when animals are swept out to sea on rafts of vegetation. It doesn't mean they actually make rafts like we do and tie them together with ropes and go off sailing. It's when there's something like an earthquake or a tsunami or a great storm, animals can get swept out to sea. And we've seen this happen many times throughout history, and many species have got wide distributions because of being swept to places on trees and rafts of vegetation, and sometimes these are enormous, a mile across or more. If you remember the tsunami of 2004 in Sumatra, there was a guy swept out to sea by that, and he was at sea for about a week on one of these rafts of vegetation, and he survived by eating coconuts and drinking rainwater. And the theory is that the ancestors of the Yowie were swept across like this, and we know that Homo erectus got to Crete, the island of Crete, and the island of Crete has been an island for millions and millions of years, long before Homo erectus evolved. So they must have been swept there by the rafting method of animal distribution, which is what the Yowie could have been. It could have happened the same thing. The ancestors of the Yowie living in Southeast Asia swept out across the much smaller amount of ocean back then and colonised Australia. And this wouldn't have happened once, it would have happened many, many times. And the other theory they explore is that it's somehow supernatural. It's a paranormal creature. And there are, the same with Sasquatch, Bigfoot, there are weird Yowie reports. There are Yowie reports that run alongside poltergeist reports. There are Yowie reports where they have these weird glowing eyes. They seem impervious to gunfire, and they can bring with them what we call the nameless dread. It's a term from H.P. Lovecraft, but this intense fear, this sort of panic-inducing fear that not just hairy wild men, but other types of monster like lake monsters and things, and wing monsters can bring, which suggests they might be supernatural. Weird thing is, with the Yeti, things like the Yeti in Asia, you don't really get this. You don't really get these kinds of weird reports. There are only a handful of them compared to the North American Sasquatch and the Yowie in Australia, where there are very much a minority, but there are a significant amount of them. Now, I think there are two things going on. I think with both the Yowie and the Sasquatch, there are relic hominins, just like there are on mainland Asia, that are flesh and blood creatures in the same way that we are. And I also think that there is a paranormal phenomenon that mimics them. For example, you get all over Britain and in other countries too, you get stories and legends of ghostly demonic black dogs with red glowing eyes, but you get real dogs as well. People see human shaped phantoms, they see phantasms of humans, but there are real flesh and blood humans as well. I don't think that ghosts, well, not the majority of ghosts anyway, have got anything to do with the souls of dead human beings. I think there's something completely different, some other phenomenon. And I think part of that phenomenon is the weirder reports of these hairy giants around the world. And it also looks at the littlefoots in Australia as well, the brown jacks or junjadis, the little hairy men, which behave very like fairies in European folklore. But altogether, if you can get hold of this book, it's an absolute Fortean and cryptozoological gem.
One of the theories that I've always liked, even though I'm the first to admit that it's probably not true, one of the theories I've always liked about the Yowie is that it is somehow a parallel evolution. It's a piece of parallel evolution to either primates or bears in the rest of the world, because, as you know, the whole thing of parallel evolution in Australia is that there are ecological niches filled by creatures all around the world which are mirrored in Australia, and the most famous one probably being the thylacine, which fills the same ecological niche as dogs and wolves and foxes did elsewhere in the world, and kangaroos that fill the same ecological niche as deer and antelope. And I've always loved the idea that something had evolved to fill the same ecological niche as either bears or the great apes.
Well, there was a extinct marsupial, I believe it was related to the wombats and related to Diprotodon. Its name, if memory serves me right, was Heliotheria, and it's sometimes called the marsupial ape because it had front legs longer than its back legs, giving this sort of gorilla-like appearance in its outline. But in life it would have looked more like a sort of a weird, huge wombat than an ape. And of course the Yowie moves on its hind legs, and it manipulates tools in the same way that other relic hominins do. There's a book by a guy called Graham Joyner on the Yowie, which I brought at great expense off of eBay once, and he lionises the theory that it's a unknown marsupial that is evolved parallel to apes, but it's a terrible book. It's abysmally written, nowhere near as well researched as Tony and Paul's works, and trying to push this whole idea that it's a marsupial just doesn't work. It really doesn't work. Whatever the Yowie is, it's not a marsupial. I think it's some sort of primate, either a great ape or more likely a relic hominin, and alongside it there's some stranger phenomenon going on that seems to mimic it in some ways.
There are theories that have been told and promulgated that a unknown relic hominin managed to build its own little boats and sail right across the Pacific, but I for one have always found that idea completely ludicrous.
No, when you look at the tool use they have, it's nowhere near advanced enough. They'll hurl rocks, they'll swing clubs, that's about it. Their tool use is similar to that of chimpanzees. You don't see chimpanzees building boats and sailing to sea. So that idea is nonsense. Although they may have been swept across oceans by the rafting mechanism.